Hey you witches, how you doing today? We are back with another video and today we have a really special guest, my friend Mako, all the way from France on the almost other side of the world. And we're gonna have a chat today. We were gonna do a few videos together and we thought it would be fun to do sort of a get to know you introduction video to get us started. So Mako, I'll hand it over to you. You could introduce yourself and just let us know a little bit about you.
Yeah. So hi everyone. My name is Mako. I'm a Gaulish practitioner. So I focus on Gaulish Druidism, and I'm a Gaulish polytheist. And I also work as a green witch herbalist. It's kind of weird for me to use the green witch label, but it's the closest thing that will be able everyone will be able to understand. So that's how I switch up, how I split up my time between druidry and herbalism. Yeah.
Very, very cool. So how do you identify more as a druid or more as a witch?
Druid.
A druid for
Druid,
sure.
really, yeah.
So how did you get started in druidry?
So because I mean, it's very different in the English speaking online community because in France, we grew up with the Gauls, like it's part of the culture that we were taught in school. So I was introduced to druids, I think even before I was introduced to witches, like even as like a concept. So that really cemented something in my brain of being interested in local practices because witchcraft is very broad and that's super interesting. But in France, we have regional practices and we even have regional languages. So people who don't speak French, even to this day, that live in France have like the French ID and everything, and they just don't speak French. And that's how I got started into Druidism because I got so interested in the history of the Gaulish people. And the community I was brought up in is a very rural, mountainous community. And the stuff I was taught in that community, even though they didn't have the words for it at the time, was 100% Druidry. It just wasn't using these words. And the more I researched what the elders were teaching me, the more I was connecting the dots between what we were practicing in the modern day and what was taken from ages ago and brought into our practices to this day. And when you get researching, it's the same thing with witchcraft. You just research more and more, and it gets so interesting, and you just pick up knowledge everywhere. And
Oh,
yeah, so it's a very old thing. It's not something that's brand new.
no, that is really, really neat. So you were kind of raised with it a little bit.
Yes, yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
very cool. So how do you so you kind of got started off learning about it at school, and then
Yeah.
when you sort of broadened your research, where did you go from there? Did you go to the internet? Did you go to books? Did you have like elders that taught you? Like, how did you learn?
Mix of things because we didn't have internet when I was a kid. I'm just at the generation that just in between where we got internet and like phones later, like we were teenagers already. So when you were a kid, if you wanted to know something, you just went to the library and you looked up anything you could in the few books that your local library had. So that's how I got the more research heavy scientific quote unquote research. And then my grandmother was a botanist, so she would take me like on hikes, and she would teach me like the Latin names of plants before I even knew the French names for them, because it was just like her stuff. She just loved it so much. And then just the community I was around, they didn't have like they didn't call it Druidism or witchcraft. They just called it like the knowledge of the
It
land.
just
Like it
was.
was, yes, it just, everyone knew that if you wanted to cure this, you would use this plant. And if you lost your sheepdog, you would ask this being to bring it back. So it was just part of the culture.
Oh, that is so cool. Like, I want to grow up with something like that. That is really, really
Yeah,
wonderful.
that's living in the countryside. It's very kind of isolated, so you have to rely on the community heavily
Yeah.
because you don't have anything else. You're miles away from the nearest like hospital or doctor, and so yeah, if you have a problem, you rely on your neighbors.
Oh, and I love that your grandmother taught you. Like, what a wonderful like experience to be able to do that with your own family and learn from your family like that.
Yeah,
That is
yeah,
that's like ideal, you know, that's like like if I were to write a book about, you know, paganism, witchcraft, druidry, and like that's, you know, that's how you would describe your characters growing up with it and having these elders in the community and learning and just absorbing it all organically. That
yeah.
is that is
So
very,
to
very
be
cool.
fair, it's a very Christian-based culture. Like
Mhm.
that's what was so interesting is when I started researching, I realized, oh, but actually this is so old. Like it predates Christianity by like a few centuries actually. But in the collective consciousness, just because of how Christianity spread, it's very linked to Christianity, even though it's extremely pagan actually.
Yeah, I'm learning a lot about like Celtic um culture, and it's the same. It's like that, very mixed with Christianity. Um
Yeah. I
yeah.
mean, the Gauls were one of the Celtic nations, so it just mixed. Yeah, it's very now it's fused so much together than for the older generations. You don't even try to talk to them about like druid and stuff because it doesn't compute. It's not.
Yeah,
It's
they're doing it
too.
without even realizing it because
Yes,
they're coming from it from like a cultural aspect, not necessarily a
yes,
spiritual aspect.
absolutely yes.
Oh, that is really cool. So, okay, that's all really interesting. Can you like sort of describe for me your journey so far with Druidism?
Yeah, sure. It started as a way to learn how to heal because I wanted to improve my day-to-day life with chronic pain and disability. So I got into herbalism because I found a specific herbal tea that was lessening my pain. And when I realized that I basically had all of the plants in that tea, like in my backyard, I was thinking, okay, I don't need to buy it, obviously, because I have everything that I need. And then you start researching and you're like, oh, this plant that I've always seen like everywhere, it's actually really helpful. And it snowballs from there. So that's how I got started from like the practical side, just like learning how to heal. And when you get into that and you dig a bit more, you get into, okay, but this plant also had magical correspondences and it was linked to religious rituals and like spiritual beliefs. And then you research the local folklore around each plant. And because I'm French, the local folklore is Gaulish. Like that's what it was at the start. So that's how my practice built. It built on a foundation of wanting to heal and wanting to improve health in general. And then it got into the spiritual religious stuff.
Ah, that's really neat. Yeah, it started kind of more just on the herbalism, the practical side,
Yes,
but then you kind of were drawn to it
100%.
and grew more. That's really
Yeah.
interesting. Have you had any sort of defining moments in your practice that sort of really, you know, set the tone for what was to come next?
Yes, I'd say. It it really started with, like I mentioned, with like the sheepdogs that were going missing, because so my mother is a sheep farmer, so that's why it's so specific. And we have a bunch of dogs that are sheepdogs, obviously. and we really rely on them to care for the sheep. And one of our dogs went missing. He just ran away, which happens, but it's always a bit terrifying. And so I just went through my books because I was getting a bit frantic also. I was like willing to try pretty much anything, and I found references to a patron deity of like lost animals and lost people, but also like in a kind of philosophical sense, like you lose yourself, it's a bit of both. And I was like, okay, sure, I'm just going to try. So I do my stuff, candles, like prayer stuff, and the next morning the dog is back. And I was like, okay, this is like wow. And I was just like, it wasn't even like about myself. I was just like, okay, so obviously there's something with like this deity, and the more like animals like sheep went missing, like because it just happens, the mountain is huge, so they just sometimes they vanish, and the more I kept doing it, the more they came back. And so it was like kind of confirmation, like, okay, something is working here. Like I really need to get into this. And so that got me really excited.
Oh, that is a really cool story. I love that. I actually have one with animals too, where I had ducks in my backyard, baby ducks, and they sort of got out of my yard before I could scoop them up and put them in a box and carry them down to the local pond. And I was a little frantic, similar. I was like very worried about them. And I just threw together this like random spell and was like, just please, please keep them safe. I just poured all my energy into like, just please keep these ducklings safe, because it's like 5 blocks through the suburbs to get to the nearest lake. And 20 minutes later, my neighbor messaged me and said, hey, I found your ducks. And I took them down to the lake. And I was like, yes, it worked. There's something about animals that just like pulls at your heart, right? That's really cool. So, I mean, obviously we're speaking in English, but do you do most of your work in French?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. I incorporate some of the regional languages that I was talking about, because I was taught some of them in school, and some of my family members, like especially my paternal grandfather, he was forced to learn French in school because like of some stupid laws from the government. But at his house and just in his village and in general, they were all speaking the regional language, which we call patois in French. So I incorporate some of the words that I picked up from the regional languages of the places I've lived and my family has lived.
Mm-hmm. So that brings me to your next question. So basically, like where you live, you speak French because you're in France, but French is not actually the original language of that area?
No, French.
I just assumed French was always French.
No, it's actually okay. I'm kind of pulling this out of thin air, but I'm pretty sure French is an evolution of Old French, which is a bastardized version of a Roman language. So no, Roman, not Roman as in like the Romans, as in like a romantic language, like Spanish, Italian, that's like romantic languages. So I'm pretty sure French was like a mix between a weird mix of Latin and Italian and like Germanic languages, and that was Old French. But France, if you look at like a map of France until even like pretty recently, like a couple 100 years ago, it didn't look the same as it does today. And you will notice that the places where regional languages are still very strong today are places that weren't part of France like 200, 300 years ago.
Right.
And so these languages are also, most of them, Roman languages, but they share some roots with Old French. But most French people wouldn't be able to understand regional languages if they aren't taught the language. It's too different.
Really? Oh, that's fascinating. I had no idea. I just assumed everybody in France spoke like the same French. Like,
Yeah, no.
I mean, I guess it makes sense, right? I mean, everybody in Canada don't all speak the same French. Like, um, French in Nova Scotia is very different from the French in Alberta, like small town Alberta, which is very different than the French from Quebec.
Yeah, it just develops differently.
Yeah, and like Quebec French and France French,
Yeah.
totally different.
I mean, I understand it perfectly, which is different than the regional languages, which you have to be taught. But someone from Quebec speaks to me, I understand as if they were French.
Yes. Yes. Fair enough. Yeah. Okay, so I wanted to talk to you. You mentioned a little bit about chronic pain, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about mental health and, well, physical disability, and how does that play a role in your druidry, and like how does that affect how you can practice? Just coming as
It's
somebody else who has like sort of mental health. I've got the
yeah,
ADHD and anxiety, and it plays a role in my practice in a good way, because my healing path from all of this, my recovery from all of this, if you will, has also heavily influenced my witchcraft practice, but it also negatively affects it in the things that I can and can't always do and accomplish. So I'm just curious how that sort of affects your practice.
yeah, it's a huge part of my practice because I I made a video about it because I was a bit frustrated about the discussion around daily practice. But yeah, it's daily practice isn't, in my opinion, isn't very disability friendly, but that's another discussion.
No, and
But yeah,
it's funny because I did a video about that is very ableist, that idea that you must practice every day, because
yeah,
some people just physically can't, some people mentally cannot. And it was funny, I had either everybody was like, I totally agree with you, or the pushback was intense with people saying, no, you have to practice, like you have to have and I'm like, no.
yeah.
That's
That's yeah, that's the discourse around daily practice is very, very not nuanced, shall
yeah,
we say.
no, it's very
But
polarizing, and it
yeah,
shouldn't be. It
but
is
yeah,
very nuanced.
it's very linked to my practice because first of all, because I started with herbalism because I wanted to improve my chronic pain. So just from that, just from the start. But on top of that, um, it affects everything from the minor stuff like the way I set up my altar because like I can't kneel some days or I can't sit down in some ways, just like my legs aren't gonna cooperate. The way I set up like prayer and worship of deities around stuff I can do lying down or sitting down. It's yeah, it's very linked in those ways and in how I interact with deities in a broader sense because of course a lot of the worship that I do is going to be linked with healing and pain and stuff like that. It's not maybe like success or prosperity like for other people who work with deities.
Yeah,
It affects that a lot. Yeah.
yeah. So um do you have like a regular practice that you do, or do you leave it more open?
I have a book of prayers for the deities I'm dedicated to, and those are very short, like 4 sentences prayers that I can like. I just know them from the top of my head, so that means I can say them whenever I have like the mental energy, which is very useful. And but as far as ritual practices, I do the same every time. No, I just I have to work around my disability. So I haven't found something that would work in any situation, for example.
Yeah,
It always has to be shifted a bit.
yeah, yeah. So do you sort of give yourself permission, like if I can't do something this full moon, that's okay, like I'm just, you
Oh
give
yeah,
yourself permission to
yeah,
sort of just practice when you can.
Yes, but also because in a way, druidic practice is a lot more forgiving than witchcraft, because it's not like for example, you mentioned the full moon. The full moon isn't so important in druidic work. So, I mean, it's great. The boost in power is great, but it doesn't have much importance in the ways of when you need to communicate with deities or when you need to do divination or stuff like that, just because of the way the Gaulish view the world. So that's the easy part of druidism, is you don't have so many ritualized stuff as you do in witchcraft.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I find I have a hard time with a lot of, the more like the new moon and the full moon. And like, I'll be honest, I miss them half the time because I'm just spaced out and I totally forget. And I have a very hard time, like, if it says that you do it on the new moon, I can't, like, people are like, it's a 3-day window, like do it the day before, do it that you're fine, right? And I intellectually understand that, but my brain can't let it go. It's like, no, it has to be on the day of the full moon, like.
And if you missed it, then just wait another month.
Yeah, my brain works, it's now or it's not now. It's just literally not now, not now, now.
Yeah.
And I missed that now window and I can't go back and do it because I'm like, no, it was yesterday.
Yeah.
So I find I have I have to just be forgiving in my practice as well and just say, well, you know what, that one just was not going to be for me. Like I just missed the dark moon, which was yesterday, and I realized it today. And I mean, theoretically today is still the dark, like it's literally like 12 hours later. 12 hours is not a big difference, but in my brain it's different. Oh, that was Gina again. Now here I just had an idea and it just flipped right out of my mind. Do you find so that's some ways you have to sort of accommodate in your practice for disability, but do you find that your disability, physical or mental, actually adds to your practice as well, that it brings something extra to your practice?
Not in a very concrete way, but more in how I interact with material that I find in like online or in books and stuff, because I always have to do mental gymnastics to know, am I going to be able to do this in a way that is meaningful, or am I just going to need to change it so much that actually I should just make my own, now that it's like so changed from the interesting stuff I found at the start. And it influences the way I write my own like posts and like advice and recipes, how I always put like closed caption on my videos and stuff, because it just like it gives you a new perspective. It's like, I wish the community was more disability friendly towards me, so I should lead by example. Basically, that's how it changes my practice for the better, I think.
No, I think that's great. Yeah, it does sort of change your awareness, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I like that idea where it's like, just because you find something, a ritual or something that's beautiful, and you're like, I want to do that, but again, you have to accommodate, you have to change it, and so it makes you more creative, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
You know, it makes you more creative and it makes your ritual more personalized.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's my grimoire is very, very disabled. Like it's you have to be very honest with yourself sometimes. It's a lot of parentheses, but if you're not able to do that, just have like a bunch of other options because like that's just how I have to work around stuff sometimes. And there's this saying that I'm gonna butcher, but something about how limitations are creating creativity or something. Like the more limited you are, the more creative you're gonna get. So sometimes you have to get very creative, is what I'm saying.
But I think that's a good thing, do you know? Because I know when I was first starting out, and I would just see a ritual and say, oh, that's beautiful, I want to do it. And then I would do it and it wouldn't connect.
Mm-mm.
I would be like, okay, I said
Yes.
all the words, I did all the actions. Now what? Like I'm waiting for it to
Yeah.
connect, and it just wouldn't quite connect because I hadn't personalized it. And I think that if you're like fully able-bodied, able-minded, whatever, you don't even think maybe I need to adapt this. Whereas now, like I know now with the way my brain works, I have to adapt things. I have to be a little bit more flexible, and it actually makes my witchcraft, I feel like it makes it a little bit stronger because it is more
Yes.
personalized. And I do spend that extra time thinking about how's it going to work for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. It really um it really helps you narrow down what makes your practice yours, because if you only have so much energy and motivation to do something, you want to do the stuff that really matters to you, and you're gonna get rid of all the fluff.
Yes.
Which is something I noticed really quickly, because since I started with Druidism and like folk practice basically, and then got into witchcraft, I didn't know what I liked in witchcraft. So like I did like circles, for example, and I was like, no, that's not my thing. But because it was written like in a bunch of resources I was finding, I was like, okay, so apparently for like to practice witchcraft, I have to do circles. Doesn't matter that I've been like practicing druidism for like 10 years. I've never heard of that thing. But I mean, the internet says I have to do it, so I guess I'm gonna do it. And then I mean, you realize very soon if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Same with like correspondences I would find online for herbs that I had been using for years before, like as a druid and as a herbalist. And everyone was like, "Oh yeah, lavender is this thing and chamomile is this thing." I was like, "How come? Like, how did you figure? Did you have a conversation with the lavender and just told you?" Because that's not like correspondences in my world are so linked to how they're useful as a healing plant that sometimes someone is like, oh yeah, this is so like masculine and also very planet Jupiter. What? and and very like it's assertive, and also you're going to use it for hexes. And I'm like, do you realize that this is like a fever cure, and it calms your nerve down, and like why would it be a
I'm gonna
hexing
hex you with a
tool when
fever
it's like
cure.
such. Yeah, exactly. So that's why they didn't make sense to me. Just it wasn't computing in my brain.
And it's funny you say that, because that is something that I struggled with witchcraft for a long time, because I couldn't find anything that felt like it fit until I found traditional or folkloric witchcraft, which is based on folk practice, which is very much about customizing your practice to working with your ancestry and working with the land that you live on.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and making like exactly that, you make your own correspondences, when it comes to even like the directions and like where air, water, fire, earth fall in the compass,
Yeah.
right? Like it's completely different. Like you customize that to yourself, you customize your correspondences, and you build a real relationship, like right, like you take an herb and you study it and you build a relationship with it and with the spirit of that plant. And exactly, you pull your own correspondences, which might not match to what anybody else is doing, but that's your personal experience and that's what you've learned from that plant. And then that's, you build your practice. It's very personal, which I felt
Yeah.
was kind
And
of lacking with the like, here, just memorize this list of
yes.
all the herbs and what they do.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing. I'm it's going to be a very personal opinion, but I think that's the main problem with having an online community, because everyone is trying to get a consensus on what everything does and how everything works and stuff. But if you go back to traditional witchcraft and folk practices and how it is still done to this day in the countryside and in little villages, um, every healer and every witch had their own practice and their own way of using stuff, and there was a reason you were going to see a specific witch instead of another one, because they weren't all doing the exact same thing. Whereas today, if you go online and look up very popular creators and you each ask them, for example, a a glamour or a love spell or a calming spell, they're each going to put the same herbs inside, use the same crystal, say the same words, and pray to the same gods. And so in that case, why would I see one instead of the other? Whereas in my local community, if I'm sick with something or I need something done, I know exactly who I'm gonna see, because they've all molded this very broad thing that is folk practice. I mean, it's in the name, it's folk, like the folks of your village. They're individuals and they're gonna make it into their individual stuff. So that's what I have a problem with that kind of very safe, very samey,
Yes.
very we
It's
we all
funny.
agree on how everything works.
Yes. And I just did a video on this, and it was witches stop acting like Christians. That idea that there is one way to do it, there is one
Yes.
righteous path, that if you don't follow the right
Yeah.
path, you're gonna be, facing the wrath of God. It's like it's not
Oh
like
yeah.
that in witchcraft. You follow your path, and it might not be like anybody else's path, but if it works for you, it works. Period. It doesn't have to, you don't have
Yeah.
to agree with anybody else. If I want to,
And do you
do
know
my way.
why I think? Do you know why I think that is? And I think why your Christian metaphor is so apt. It's because from what I've seen, Wicca is very, very present even in stuff that isn't Wiccan, to the point where you learn stuff thinking it's like witchcraft, when actually no, it's not witchcraft, it's Wicca, which is fine. I mean, it's its own thing, great, but I would like to know that it's Wiccan and not witchcraft.
Yeah.
It's different, and because Wicca is a religion, same as Christianity,
Yeah.
which is fine, it just means that there's like one way to do it because it's a religion. There's just, I mean, I'm a Gaulish polytheist. I'm religious. I know how it works, but what I do in Gaulish polytheism isn't what I do in witchcraft. And there's one way to do stuff in religious practice, and there's many ways to do stuff in folk practice. And that's why I think it's such a good metaphor to talk about Christianity, because it is very Wiccan centric, even when it doesn't have the Wiccan label on the tin. And it's a religion, so it's very one way to do it.
Yeah. Wicca is very, and I mean, thank goodness for Wicca. I mean, they're what made witchcraft mainstream, what really brought us out of the shadows, which I think is great. And I mean, I love the Wiccans. They've done some really great work, but I think so many people don't realize how influenced their practice is by
Yes.
Wicca.
Yeah,
and that's why I
100%.
say you have to read broadly. You have to read about Wicca just so you know if that's what you're doing. And
Yes.
like, so yeah, so many people, you talk to them, they're like, oh, I'm an eclectic witch, and when you get talking about it,
No, you're a
doing
Wiccan.
Wicca, and they're like, oh no, I'm not Wiccan, and it's like, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's a lot of, I think it's important, right, to understand the influences that come into your practice.
Yes.
And that's definitely one I've been noticing a lot, is that Christian influence and that idea of doing it right, and there's one right way, and you must follow the path to have the the grace of the gods on you. And it's like, it doesn't work like that in paganism. The gods aren't like in your day-to-day life. It's not about the relationship. It's much more vast than that. Anyways, I could go on for days.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's been lovely chatting with you. Is there
Yes.
anything else that you wanted to share that you wanted people to know about you?
Oh yeah. Actually, I'm drawing my own tarot deck based on Gaulish symbolism, and like the kind of mission statement is that each card of the tarot is represents a member of the witchcraft or pagan community that I've met in my life. And so each person has their card, which is like heavily stylized. It's not like a one-to-one representation, but it's inspired by people I've met. Each card is so very diverse because of how diverse the community is, and it's a working tool based on Gaulish symbolism and like Celtic symbolism in general. It's not just Gaulish. But yeah, so it's called the Tarot of Belisama, and it's on all my socials, so you're going to find it easily. But yeah, that's my big project at the moment, just
That
drawing my
is
own
really
tarot deck.
cool. I didn't know you were doing that. That is so wonderful. And I'm sorry, I think you said it, but when is it coming out?
It's not done yet, so I'm not gonna
You
say
don't
a
have a
date.
date yet?
I'm still yeah no I'm still drawing it, so I don't know when it's gonna be over. Yeah.
That's a really cool project. I love that idea. Again, it's like, again, you're customizing, right? That's really cool.
Yeah.
That is so cool. Well, thank you so much for chatting with us today, Mako. It was
Yeah, thank
really
you
nice.
for inviting me.
Yeah, it was just really nice to get to know you. And
Yeah.
I'm looking forward. We're going to do some more video collaborations
Yes.
on some more structured topics. And yeah, so to all our viewers, thanks for hanging out, getting to know Mako a little bit better. And yeah, you'll probably be seeing a little bit more of her. And otherwise, that's our video for today. So thank you so much. We'll catch you in the next one. Bye.